We're back again with CBS News senior security analyst Mike Morell, plus Farah Pandith, former special representative to Muslim communities at the State Department. She's now at the Council on Foreign Relations, and American Enterprise Institute's Danielle Pletka. Thank you all for being here. Danielle, I want to start with you. The response to the attacks in Paris should be what for the United States?
I think we need to look at the challenges that we face on the ground, recognize that if we don't do something, we will see what happened in Paris, in New York, LA, Washington, somewhere in the United States. We need to have a clear strategy that addresses the challenge in both Syria and Iraq, but also Yemen, North Africa, Libya. We could keep going here. We need serious partners on the ground. We need more of our own troops on the ground. We need a concerted effort.
Farah, what's your assessment of what we should do?
So there's a military component, John, and certainly that's important, and we can't do without it. But the other half of the strategy is obviously the non-military, and that includes three things. One is when we think about the money, when we think about the momentum, when we think about ideas. One is stopping the ability for money to flow to these terrorist organizations. And that's something primarily government can do, and it's also something to build public awareness about, the ivory trade, the sale of antiquities. There's also a piece in terms of the emotional and psychological momentum that is taking place with this group, moving into the minds of all of us, whether it's fear, whether it's emotions that are moving us in a particular way. But the most critical component is the idea space, and that is what we would call the war of ideas. How do we engage in bringing down the number of recruits so that ISIS doesn't have armies? And because ISIS is using the digital space, we need to build a digital army. And we need to do it proportionally and at scale.
Aren't those things in tension when you're trying to win the war of ideas and you're also using drones to kill, and that whips up lots of anti-American fervor? That it would seem to me no number of tweets and Facebook and so forth could overcome what has to be done militarily.
So let's be really clear. What's happening in the ecosystem obviously makes a difference, but there are almost 1 billion young Muslims under the age of 30 across the world. That's the pool from which the extremists are recruiting. And because they're millennials, they're using the digital tools that we all have to move them forward. We have yet to go at this at scale. We have yet to go all in and really create the kind of momentum in the digital space that we need. In order to do that, we need to get credible voices scaled up. There is no scarcity of credible voices. What we are missing is the scale up, the proportional response in the online space. And I'm not just talking about tweets that are going back and forth. I'm talking about ideological influence for these young people who are being lured in by predators online. And we need to think about it like that.
Mike Morell, let me ask you about momentum. As it's been explained to me, ISIS benefits from these successes. So does what the coalition or the United States has to do in retaliation have to have a big kind of showy aspect to it on the military side?
Yeah, I think if you look at the strengths and weaknesses of ISIS, their greatest strength is the sense that they're winning and the momentum that that creates, and the followers that it brings and the foreign fighters that it brings and the radicalization of young people around the world that it brings. That is one of their great strengths. They just benefited significantly from that with the downing of the airliner and with this attack in Paris. So pushing back on that momentum is really, really important.
Danielle, Secretary Clinton said in the debate last night, this cannot be an American fight alone. There's this sometimes semantic but debate about where America's role is in this fight. Martin O'Malley, running to her right in this argument, basically said America has to lead and they'll bring other people along. Give me your assessment of that.
Let me utter the words I've never uttered before. I agree fully with Martin O'Malley. I thought that remark on Mrs. Clinton's part was rather strange. She has always been a proponent of American leadership. When she was Secretary of State, she recommended that the president be more forward-leaning on Syria. Look, we are the only ones with the capacity to actually lead on this fight. Now, should we be alone? Absolutely not. We should be working with parties on the ground. We should be working with allies, but we haven't shown the leadership up to now. We really haven't. Not on refugees, not on fighting ISIS, not on fighting Al-Qaeda, not on helping good guys.
And there's this argument that countries in the region should do their share. You hear it a lot from the administration, the free rider problem. Are they going to be, I mean, can you wait it out long enough for them to do their share? Or again, does the United States have to move and then perhaps bring them along?
Look, this is sort of, football fantasy camp, foreign policy. You know, when you're talking about the Saudis or the Emiratis or the Turks or whoever it is doing their share, what we end up with is foreign policy priorities that belong to the Saudis or the Turks or the Emiratis or the Qataris. And that's the challenge for us. We have a desired outcome here that is actually not the same as the desired outcome of parties in the region. That's why when you subcontract to Saudi Arabia or you subcontract, God forbid, as John Kerry seems to always want to do, to Iran or to Russia, you end up with outcomes that are ultimately dangerous for the United States.
Farah, let me ask you a question here. In response to these kinds of attacks, when you talk about that space, the battle for ideas, is the government doing it wrong? I mean, is there an overreaction that sends a different kind of message?
So I think that there are things that the government has done both in the Bush administration and in the Obama administration to take hold of the ideological space. And there's only, I have to say, only so much you can do in the government space. The way we have to go at it is to look at the armies that we can build professionally outside of government. Those are the credible voices, the former extremists and others who can make a difference. Where can government play a role there? Their money can go to some of the core funding for some of these organizations that are doing it, not in terms of how they message or what they message, but in terms of setting up these organizations to do something. These organizations are working at a pace that is really quite excellent, but they don't have enough money to be able to scale up the way they need to do this. The second piece the government can make a difference is to ask the private sector to go all in with us. That is to say, not partner with government, but to partner with the actors on the ground who can actually make a difference. And the third, by the way, is to say that we can actually go at the ideological war with the kind of will and determination that ISIS has. They aren't sophisticated, they are determined. We need to be determined too.
Quickly at the end here, Mike, the administration says, well, this is a long war. So what do you hear when you hear that from the administration? When they're criticized about the pace on ISIS and taking the fight to ISIS, administration official says, well, the president always said this was going to be a long war.
There's a difference between the ups and downs in a long war, the victories for us and the victories for them. Difference between that and what is clearly the momentum in their favor, what is clearly them advancing their capabilities.
Thanks so much, all of you.